It was a quiet day in the neighborhood. The kind of day where dogs bark in backyards, kids ride bikes on sidewalks, and neighbors nod to each other while watering plants. No one expected it to turn into a war zone. Then a sharp crack split the air, followed by another. Gunshots. People ducked, cars screeched, and windows slammed shut. Down the block, an officer fell, shot and bleeding, struggling to stay awake as sirens screamed in the distance. Backup was still far. He pressed his hand to the wound, gasping, blood soaking through his uniform. He looked around alone. Then, just as his vision blurred, someone jumped the fence. Not a cop. Not backup. A man in plain clothes, no weapon, no badge, just a neighbor. And he was running straight toward the danger dot Mr. Garcia had been sitting on his porch, sipping tea, when he heard the first shot. At first, he froze. Then he saw the officer fall behind a low wall in the empty lot next door. Without thinking twice, he leapt his backyard fence and ran toward the injured man. "Hey! I'm coming! Hold on!" he shouted, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. The officer groaned, his eyes barely open. "Help me, please!" Mr. Garcia knelt beside him, his heart pounding. Blood was everywhere. But the officer was alive, barely. "You're going to be okay," he said, sliding his arm under the officer's shoulder. "We're getting you out of here." I can't feel my leg," the officer whispered. "You don't have to," Garcia said. "You just hold on." Bullets still cracked in the distance, and the tension in the air was thick. But Garcia didn't run. He pulled the officer up with all his strength, dragging him slowly across the gravel, through the gate, and toward the sidewalk. Neighbors peeked out of windows. Some started filming. One woman shouted for help. A teenager called 911 again, yelling, "Someone's helping the cop. He's bleeding bad. Hurry." Garcia didn't stop. "Just a little more," he muttered. "Don't fall asleep, okay?" The officer groaned, barely conscious now. When they reached the sidewalk, Garcia eased him down beside a tree. He took off his own shirt and pressed it against the wound. "Come on, stay with me," he said, his hands shaking but steady. The sirens were closer now. More squad cars, an ambulance. Right here. A voice called out, "We've got one down officer." Down, paramedics rushed over. They checked vitals, applied pressure, started IVs. Garcia stepped back, his hands covered in blood. His knees shook. Someone gave him water, but he didn't drink it. He just watched. The officer was loaded into the ambulance. Before they closed the doors, he opened his eyes just barely and looked at Garcia. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved me." Garcia nodded, unable to speak. The ambulance pulled away. Later that night, Garcia sat on his porch again, this time surrounded by news vans and flashing lights. Reporters asked questions. Officers shook his hand. One of them said, "You didn't have to do that. You could have been shot too." Garcia just said, "I saw someone who needed help." The story spread on the news, online, in police stations. Across the city, some called him a hero. He didn't think so. He said anyone would have done the same, but not everyone would have jumped a fence and walked into a live shooting scene. Not everyone would have used their own shirt to stop the bleeding of a stranger in uniform. Days later, the officer woke in the hospital. He had survived. The bullet missed his spine by less than an inch. Doctors said if he hadn't gotten help. When he did, he might not have made it. When Garcia visited, the officer smiled weakly and said, "I owe you my life." They shook hands. After that, they kept in touch. Not as hero and victim, but as two men who crossed paths at the worst possible moment and somehow helped each other survive it. In a time where the world often feels divided, their bond reminded everyone watching that sometimes it takes just one person, one brave step to make all the difference. The smoke was thick, black, choking, and everywhere. Sirens wailed from the distance, but the fire had already swallowed most of the small apartment building. Neighbors screamed, running out into the cold air, some in pajamas, others barefoot. But not everyone made it out. 2 children were still. Inside, one officer had just arrived. He scanned the area fast, trying to get answers through the panic. A woman pointed, sobbing and shouting in Spanish. "Miss Hijos, Miss Hijos." He didn't need a translator. Her babies were in there. "I need backup and a ladder," he radioed. "We've got kids inside." But there was no time. The flames were growing and people were yelling over each other. Just then, a man pushed through the crowd. No gear. Number. Badge. He wasn't a firefighter or police. Just someone who'd seen the smoke from the next block and ran toward it instead of away. His name was Jonathan, though no one asked. No one had to. "I can go in," he shouted. "I know this building." "Sir!" "Stop! It's not safe!" the officer yelled, but Jonathan didn't stop. He pulled his jacket over his mouth, ducked low, and ran straight into the fire. The officer followed up to the door, but the heat pushed him back. He called for more units, more medics, more water. "We've got a man inside." Repeat, citizen. Inside, and kids still trapped. Inside, Jonathan moved fast. He knew the layout. It wasn't a big place, just a maze of tight rooms. He heard coughing. He followed the sound. "Come to the window," he shouted. "I'm here to help." A tiny hand appeared through the smoke. Then another. He lifted the first child into his arms and staggered back through the hallway. Everything burned. His eyes watered. His lungs screamed. Outside, the officer ran to the door again. "Over here!" he yelled. "Bring them here." Jonathan emerged, face covered in soot, holding a coughing little girl. "There's one more." He wheezed. "In the back room." He didn't wait. He turned and ran back in. "Wait!" The officer shouted, but it was too late. The officer took the girl to medics who were now arriving. She was crying but breathing. "Where's the other one?" A firefighter asked. "Still inside," the officer said. "With him." The fire grew louder now, like a roaring beast. It crackled, spit sparks, and lit the sky orange. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Then from the back window dash movement, Jonathan appeared, holding a toddler close to his chest. He was trying to break the glass. "Help! Over here!" The officer screamed. They grabbed a ladder from the truck and rushed it over. Jonathan passed the child through the broken frame, gasping. I can't see," he said. "I can't." He slumped near the window, coughing hard. The firefighter reached in, grabbed his arm, and pulled. Moments later, Jonathan was out. Both kids were safe. Medics swarmed around them. Oxygen, water, blankets, tears. The officer knelt beside Jonathan. "You didn't have to go back in," he said. "I couldn't leave a child in there." Jonathan whispered later at the hospital. The officer visited him again. Jonathan had burns on his arms and face, nothing too serious. But his voice was still rough from smoke. "You saved their lives," the officer said quietly. Jonathan shook his head. "I just did what anyone should do." "No," the officer replied. "Not everyone runs into fire. Most people run away." The officer kept in touch with the family. The mother called Jonathan a miracle. The children began drawing pictures. Of him, one showed him with a cape like a superhero. Another had him holding their hands. The story spread in the city. News stations aired security footage of the rescue. Reporters called it heroic. Some wanted interviews. Jonathan declined. Most. He said the focus should be on the kids, but the truth was clear. A regular man saved 2 children that day. He didn't do it for attention. He didn't do it for reward. He just couldn't stand the thought of someone suffering if he had the power to help. Sometimes being a hero doesn't mean wearing a uniform or carrying a badge. Sometimes it means doing the hard thing when no one else will. And in that burning apartment, surrounded by chaos, Jonathan didn't hesitate. Because He saw two small lives that needed saving and chose to step into the fire. The morning was like any other. A single officer patrolled a quiet stretch of road just outside town. The sun had just broken through the clouds, casting a soft light on the highway. He'd stopped a few drivers, already mostly warnings, seatbelts, broken taillights, but nothing serious. That was about to change. Up ahead, a black sedan swerved between lanes, riding too close to the car in front. Then it jumped over the shoulder to pass on the right. The officer turned on his lights and followed. He didn't expect trouble. Most people pull over, talk it through, and go home with a fine. But as soon as the car stopped, something felt wrong. The driver's hands were shaky. He was agitated. His answers didn't line up. "License and registration, sir," the officer said calmly. The man grumbled and handed it over. The officer noticed the seatbelt was off. The air smelled strange sharp and earthy. "Do you mind if I ask?" the officer said. "Is there anything illegal in the vehicle?" "Nope," the driver answered, tight-lipped. "Okay, I do smell something. So I'm going to conduct a probable cause search." The man's eyes changed. "You don't have consent," he said firmly. "I'm not asking for consent." The officer replied, keeping his voice steady. "I have reason to believe there's marijuana in the vehicle." The man tensed. "Step out of the car for me," the officer said. "No, I'm not going to ask again." The driver's hand moved toward his phone. "I'm recording this. I'm calling my lawyer." "That's your right, but you still need to exit the vehicle." Then the man flung the door open fast. The officer backed up slightly, hand near his holster. "Sir, step back. Keep your hands where I can see them." But the man charged. Not with a weapon, just fists. He shoved the officer hard, knocking him back a few steps. In an instant, they were grappling by the roadside. The officer tried to get the man to the ground, but the driver was bigger, angry, wild. And there was no backup yet. Then, just as the officer's knee buckled and he nearly fell, another figure appeared. A second man ran from his pickup truck, which had pulled off behind them moments earlier. He didn't hesitate. "I've got you." The man shouted, "Hang on." He grabbed the suspect's arm and helped the officer bring him down. They wrestled him to the dirt together. The driver shouted, cursed, tried to twist free, but the stranger held strong. "Stop fighting," he barked. "You're making it worse." Finally, they got the suspect pinned. The officer cuffed him, breathing hard, his hands shaking slightly. You okay?" the stranger asked, his voice calm but firm. "I'm all right." "Just winded?" "You didn't have to do that," the officer said between breaths. "I saw you needed help." "That's all I needed to know," the man replied. Other officers arrived minutes later. They took the suspect and led him to a patrol car. He was still shouting, but weaker now. One officer turned to the stranger. "You a cop?" "No," the man said. "Just someone who wasn't going to stand there and do nothing." The officer he helped looked him in the eye. "Thank you. That could have gone really bad." The stranger shrugged. "You're out here alone. Someone's got to watch your back." They didn't exchange names. They didn't need to. But that moment stuck back at the station. The officer filed his report. The body cam footage was reviewed. It clearly showed what had happened. A routine stop that turned dangerous, and one man who ran toward the chaos, not away. A few days later, the officer found the man's number through dispatch records. He called just to say thank you again. The man said he didn't want recognition. He didn't even tell his family. "I just did what I hoped someone would do for me," he said. For the officer, it meant more than he could explain. On a lonely stretch of road, when no one else was there, someone stepped up, not because they had to, not because it was their job, just because it was right. Later, the officer told his coworkers, "It reminded me that we're not alone out here, not really. There are still people who care, people who see us as human beings, not just badges." And for the stranger in the pickup, it was simple. Sometimes the right thing is obvious. You see someone struggling. You act. No hesitation. No headlines. Just help, because kindness isn't a big thing. It's 1,000 small decisions when no one's looking. That day, on that road, one of those small decisions might have saved a life. It was supposed to be a quick chase. That's what the officer thought when he turned on his sirens and followed the speeding car through the city streets. He didn't expect the suspect to run lights, swerve through traffic, or nearly hit 2 pedestrians. And he didn't expect to be alone. Radio chatter filled the cruiser as the officer gave updates. Southbound, high speed, drivers not stopping. He called out, gripping the wheel tightly. It wasn't his first chase, but it was one of the fastest. The suspect was desperate, and it showed. The officer stayed close. Street after street, sharp turns, near collisions. Then, just before the next light, the suspect's car veered hard, clipped a barrier, and rolled. The cruiser behind tried to avoid it, but couldn't. There was a loud crash. Glass flew, metal twisted. And the cruiser came to a dead stop near the edge of the road. Inside, the officer groaned. His head hit the steering wheel, his shoulder. Throbbed and smoke was already curling from under the hood. The airbags had deployed, but the smell of gasoline was thick in the air. His radio was still on. Officer down, someone called out. Get EMS to the scene. Crash on eastbound lane, near Bellevue. But backup wasn't there yet. The officer tried to move but winced in pain. Blood trickled down from a cut on his forehead. His vision blurred. He opened the door slowly and stumbled out, clutching the side of the car. Then he collapsed. Across the street, 2 people had been waiting at the light, just regular folks heading to work. They saw the wreck, saw the smoke, and saw the officer hit the ground. Without even thinking, they ran. One of them, a man in a faded green jacket, reached the officer first. Hey, stay with me, he shouted, kneeling beside him. Can you hear me? The officer nodded faintly. His voice was weak. Gas, leaking, fire. The second stranger, a woman with her, hair tied up and wearing scrubs, looked at the engine, then back at the man. We need to move him, she said urgently. Now. I've got his left side, the man said. You get his legs. Together they lifted the officer. He groaned in pain but didn't resist. They carried him about 20 feet to the grass just as a small flame flickered from under the hood. Stay with us, the woman said, grabbing his wrist to check his pulse. You're okay. You're out. Help's coming. The officer was fading in and out. He saw shapes, lights, movement, but couldn't speak. But he heard her voice, steady, soft, comforting. You're not alone, she whispered. By the time fire and rescue arrived, the cruiser was smoking heavily. Medics rushed in with stretchers and oxygen masks. The officer was stabilized and quickly loaded into an ambulance. As he was rolled away, he grabbed the man's wrist lightly. What's your name? He asked, voice hoarse. The man just smiled. Doesn't matter. Just get better. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. You'll be okay. In the hospital, doctors treated the officer for a concussion, fractured ribs, and a shoulder injury. He was lucky, that's what they all said. But he didn't feel lucky, he felt humbled. Because strangers had saved his life. A few days later, he requested security footage from a nearby store. He wanted to see their faces. He needed to know who they were. Eventually, he tracked them down. The man worked in a garage. The woman was a nurse on her way to an early shift. Neither wanted attention. I just did what I hoped someone would do for me, the nurse said quietly. That's all. The officer insisted on meeting them. He brought a small thank you note and a framed picture of the 3 of them at the hospital. You didn't just help me, he told them. You reminded me that good people still exist, and I won't forget that. Later, when the department held a small appreciation ceremony, both the nurse and the man declined to speak. But the story still spread. People online called them heroes. Some disagreed, saying they were just doing what was right. But the officer, who nearly died alone on a roadside, saw it differently. He chased danger head-on that morning, never expecting to be the one who'd need saving. And when he did, it wasn't a fellow officer who pulled him to safety. It was two strangers who made a split-second choice to act, to care at a risk, because in the end, sometimes a uniform doesn't make the hero. Sometimes it's just the heart. The road stretched long and empty, just a few clouds in the sky. A highway officer was headed back from a long shift when she noticed a small car pulled over on the shoulder. Hazard lights blinking, who'd popped? A woman stood nearby, pacing with her phone in hand. From the way she kept glancing at traffic and muttering to herself, something wasn't right. The officer slowed and pulled up behind her. She stepped out of her cruiser and approached carefully. "You all right, ma'am?" she asked. The woman looked up quickly, her face tight with frustration. "Flat tire. My friend is supposed to come." "It's been over an hour," the officer nodded. "That's frustrating. You want me to call a tow or maybe help with the spare?" "No," the woman replied fast. "No tow, he's coming." "It's fine." The officer paused. Something felt off, but she stayed calm. "Where's your friend coming from?" "Albuquerque," the woman said. "He said he's close." But her tone was distant, and her eyes didn't meet the officer's. The officer smiled gently. "All right. Just wanted to make sure you're safe out here. I can hang around until he shows up if you'd like." No, the woman said. "It's okay, but you can give me a ride to the gas station, just down the road?" The officer hesitated, then radioed dispatch to check the plate. "A moment." Later, a voice crackled back. "That plate matches a person of interest. Suspect may be linked to a homicide out of New York. Exercise caution." The officer's heart skipped. She looked at the woman again, sweating slightly now, eyes shifting. But she stayed calm. "Actually," she said kindly, "let me just double-check something on your vehicle first." "Stay right here?" She walked to the side of the car and looked in through the window. No obvious weapons. Still, she needed to detain the woman until backup arrived. "Ma'am," the officer said, walking back slowly. "I'm going to ask you to step away from the vehicle. Just need to secure the area." "Why?" the woman asked, voice rising. "What's happening?" "Just a routine check," the officer said. "Please, just turn around and place your hands behind your back." But the woman didn't listen. She tensed, then lunged toward the door, trying to jump inside. "Ma'am, stop! Don't reach!" The officer grabbed her arm. They struggled. The woman twisted and kicked, trying to pull away. The officer pushed her back, trying to gain control. But she was alone and the woman was fighting hard. Out of nowhere, a car pulled up on the other side of the road. A man jumped out and ran across the shoulder. "Hey!" he yelled. "Need help?" The officer didn't answer. She was too busy trying to keep the woman from slipping free. The man rushed forward, shouting, "Hold her! I've got her arms!" Together, they managed to bring the woman to the ground. She kept shouting, writhing, cursing. But now she was surrounded. "Stay down," the man said firmly, helping the officer hold her down until cuffs were in place. The officer panted, wiping sweat from her brow. "Thank you," she said breathlessly. "Thank you so much." "Didn't think twice," the man said, shaking his head. "Saw you struggling. No way I was going to keep driving." Within minutes, backup arrived. Another officer took control, reading the woman her rights. She had no idea she was already being tracked. Her prints were on file. The warrant confirmed. She was the main suspect in a murder case, accused of killing her partner in another state and fleeing across borders. The man who helped stood nearby, arms crossed, watching quietly. The officer approached him again. "You really helped me back." There, if she'd made it into the car, she trailed off, thinking about what might have happened. "She didn't," he said. "Because you held your ground, I just gave you a second hand." Before you left, the officer asked his name. He smiled and gave only his first. "People don't always realize it," he said, "but officers are human too. You bleed like the rest of us. So when I saw someone fighting you, I thought, if I don't help, who will?" That stuck with her for days. Later, she visited the precinct psychologist just to talk. She was fine physically, but something in her had shifted. Not because of fear, but because of gratitude. The video footage was reviewed. Her supervisors praised her. But what she remembered most was not the struggle or the adrenaline or the headlines. It was the quiet moment after the arrest, when the stranger simply said, "You're not alone." That stayed with her more than anything. Sometimes all it takes is one person, watching from the edge of a road, to step in and change the entire outcome. A single moment of courage. A decision made in seconds. And a life spared because someone chose to care. The chase had already stretched across several city blocks, weaving through packed intersections and past stunned pedestrians. The suspect driving a stolen vehicle wasn't slowing down. In fact, the longer it went on, the more reckless he became. He sped through red lights, nearly collided with school buses, even scraped along the side of a food truck near downtown inside the police cruiser. An officer radioed updates through clenched teeth. Suspect moving north on 110. Speeds over 85. Vehicle weaving in and out of all lanes. No sign of stopping. The radio crackled with dispatch confirming backup was en route. A helicopter hovered above, tracking from the sky. But from the ground, it still felt like a blur. The city had turned into a giant maze and the suspect was racing through it, with no care for anyone in his path. People on sidewalks watched wide-eyed as the vehicle flew past. Some recorded it on their phones. Others simply froze. But one man, sitting inside a white delivery truck just ahead, saw something else, an opportunity. He'd heard the sirens minutes before they reached his street. He wasn't far from an off-ramp near the freeway. When he looked in his side mirror and saw the black car swerving toward the curb, chased by flashing lights, he made a split-second decision. He turned the wheel slightly, angling his truck across the narrow side street just enough to block half the road. "I thought maybe, just maybe, I could slow him down," he later told reporters. Didn't think it'd actually work. From above, the news chopper caught the moment. The suspect saw the truck too late. He slammed the brakes, swerved hard, and clipped the edge of a parked car. The stolen vehicle jerked, wobbled, then stopped dead between the delivery truck and a row of parked cars. The officers moved fast, but before they could even open their doors, another civilian acted. A second man, this time in a blue pickup, noticed what was happening. Instead of passing by, he pulled in behind the suspect's vehicle, boxing it in from the rear. "You're not going anywhere now," he said under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The suspect, realizing he was surrounded, panicked. From the window, he threw a small object towards someone on the sidewalk, maybe drugs, maybe evidence. Then he ducked down, hands moving fast, trying to crawl out of the passenger side. Officers exited their cruisers, weapons drawn. "Driver, hands out the window, now!" People on the sidewalk backed away, but the delivery truck driver stayed in place, doors locked, engine running. The man in the pickup stayed too calm, watching the scene unfold like something out of a movie. The suspect slowly pushed open his door and climbed out, not through the driver's side, but through the passenger window. He raised his hands, looked around at the officers, at the civilians at the Boxton Street. He knew it was over. One of the officers approached cautiously, then handcuffed him without a struggle. The danger had passed. Later, when the dust had settled and the road was cleared, officers took statements from everyone involved. They approached the truck driver and asked, "Did you know what you were doing when you blocked the street like that?" He shrugged. "Not really. Just saw something bad happening and thought maybe I could help." The man in the pickup said something similar. "Didn't feel right to just sit there. Thought if I were in their shoes, I'd want someone to do something." The officer who made the arrest said later that those two men may have saved lives. That suspect wasn't stopping, he said. If those guys hadn't stepped in, who knows how far he would have gone. Back at the station, one officer hung a still image from the chopper footage in the break room. It showed the stolen car wedged between two civilian vehicles trapped, with no escape. Underneath it, someone had scribbled, "Real teamwork has no uniform." No one was injured that day. No shots fired, no broken bones. Just a dangerous moment, diffused not just by law enforcement but by ordinary people who chose not to look away. And maybe that's the lesson. Not every hero walks in with a badge. Sometimes they show up in old trucks, in delivery vans, in jeans and sneakers. They don't ask for thanks. They don't wait for credit. They just act, because deep down, something tells them that stepping in when it matters most is what being human is really about. The sound of running footsteps echoed through the alley. Gravel crunched, fences blurred past, and the officer's breath came hard and fast. He was chasing a suspect on foot, someone who had ditched a stolen car and taken off behind a strip mall. The sun beat down, the air was thick with heat, and the officer's vest felt like an anchor on his back. Suspect heading westbound on foot. He called into his radio between breaths, wearing dark clothes, possibly armed. He had no backup yet. Just him and the suspect, slipping farther ahead with every step. The officer gritted his teeth. His legs were burning. His heart was pounding. He pushed harder, refusing to let the man get away, but his body had limits. The suspect darted over a chain-link fence and disappeared down another alley. The officer tried to follow, but his muscles gave out. He stumbled, dropped to a knee, gasping for air. Then, out of nowhere, a car pulled up fast beside him. A man leaned out the window. "You chasing him?" The officer nodded. "Yeah, I can't keep up." "Hop in." The officer hesitated. "I can't ask. You didn't ask the man cut in. Get in." Without another word, the officer climbed into the car, radio still in hand. The engine growled as the stranger hit the gas, tires squealing on the pavement. "There," the officer pointed. "Left? You just turned that corner." They tore through a narrow street, past dumpsters and broken fences. The suspect looked over his shoulder and froze his eyes wide as the car pulled up beside him. The officer jumped out. "Police, get on the ground." The suspect hesitated, then took a step back, but before he could run, the officer tackled him. This time there was no escape. Moments later, backup arrived. The suspect was cuffed and secured. Weapons were found in his bag. And the officer, still catching his breath, turned to the man who had driven him there. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I saw someone running alone." The man replied, smiling. "Didn't look right. Figured you could use a hand." "What's your name?" the officer asked. "Doesn't matter," the man said. "I was just passing through." The officer never forgot that face or that moment. He later told his sergeant he saved the arrest. But more than that, he reminded me I wasn't alone. And that wasn't the only time it had happened. A woman who shielded an officer from gunfire with her own car door. A bystander who helped stop a suspect from grabbing an officer's weapon. A shopkeeper who pulled an officer to safety during a protest that turned violent. A teenager who ran for help when a patrol car crashed near his school. People, ordinary people who saw officers not as symbols, but as fellow human beings in need. It's easy to think of police officers as tough, trained, always in control. But under the uniform, they are people too. They bleed. They get scared. They fall down. And sometimes they need someone to pull them back up. In each of these moments, strangers became lifelines. Not because they had to. Not because anyone told them to. But because something inside them said, "Help." It didn't matter what they looked like, what their background was, or what their job title said. What mattered was the heart behind their actions, the series of events scattered across different cities, on different days, involving different people, shared a common thread: compassion. A decision to act when it would have been easier to walk away. And in every case, a life may have been saved. Back at their desks, the officers went on with their reports. Back in their homes, the strangers returned to normal life quietly, humbly. No awards, no press conferences. Just a story to carry with them forever. One officer wrote in his notes, "I don't remember what the suspect looked like, but I remember the man who helped me stand when my knees gave out." In a world that often feels divided, angry, and uncertain, these moments are proof that kindness still exists. That courage isn't always loud, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who show up when no one is watching. So next time you see flashing lights and someone in uniform struggling, remember this: you don't have to be a cop to be brave. You don't have to be trained to do good. You just have to care. And sometimes that's more than enough.